Good morning, Mayor, Council, and distinguished staff and guests. I'm excited about our second budget workshop this year. We have with us three wonderful and knowledgeable presenters. First, we have Matt Weatherley, President of Public Sector Personnel Consultants, David Gavia, Executive Director of Texas Municipal Retirement System, and Lee Cameron, Senior Vice President of Frost Insurance. Julie Oakley will be introducing the first two speakers after giving a little more insight and information with regards to the specific topics that they are here to cover, and then I will do likewise with regard to Lee Cameron's topic of health insurance. Before I turn the podium over to Julie, I would like to point out that these three presenters are being video recorded. The city plans to provide a link on our city website for the public to view these presentations. The main goal is to provide more transparency for the public with regards to these three topics of salary survey and compensation, two, the city's current defined contribution plan and the option of TMRS, or Texas Municipal Retirement System, and last, health insurance benefits. Every year we go through an exhaustive review of health insurance plans for city staff. However, this year we are adding this comprehensive review of the compensation and retirement plans. This may become an annual exercise during budget preparation. Without further ado, I will turn the podium over to Julie, but not before I thank her for all her hard work with each of these presenters. Julie.
Good morning, Council. Every 2 years, let me see, where's my little...
It should be up there. Oh.
Okay. Every 2 years, a consultant from Public Sector Personnel Consultants does a study to determine salary ranges related to benchmark positions from private industry and a group of cities selected by him and the city. The salary survey completed during 2012 used private industry information for 42% of Horseshoe Bay employee positions. Positions such as police and fire department personnel did not have an equivalent private sector match. After a salary range is developed, a matrix is created which includes the employee's current salary level as it relates to the midpoint of their salary range and their performance level. Employees are evaluated annually, and one of the objectives is to determine an achievement level for a merit-based increase. Therefore, based on the achievement level and the employee's current salary level, an employee's specific raise percentage is determined. Currently, 80% of employees are within 10% over or under the midpoint of their position's range. And here is the matrix that staff uses to determine the level each year. If you are, for example, within 80 to 89% of your midpoint, and you are at level 2, which would be here, which means that you are above average during your evaluation, then you would be at 5% that year. If you are within 100 to 109% of your midpoint and you are at satisfactory, you would not be receiving additional compensation in the next year. That's how our matrix flows. Staff has also prepared a merit adjustment history, which compares the average city merit adjustment with CPI for urban wage earners and clerical workers, and the private sector wage changes in Burnett and Llano counties. Now, we didn't have this on a city level, we only had it on a county level. As you can see, most city adjustments trend closely to CPI, except for fiscal years 07 through 09. Here. During these years, there was a very high percentage of employees that were below their position's midpoint. A thorough review of a compensation policy should also include an analysis of an entity's attrition rate. Staff has prepared a comparison of full-time employees that have left Horseshoe Bay employment compared to the number of budgeted positions for the last 5.5 years. According to the Society for Human Resource Management Human Capital Benchmarking Database, the average annual turnover for state and local governments is approximately 9%. The city's 5-year average attrition rate is 10.62%, which is not too far from the average of 9. Today, Matt Weatherley is here with us, and he is going to review in more detail the methodology used for compensation administration at the city. Matt, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for coming.
Matt, before you start, I want to make one comment about process, especially because this is being recorded. I think we need to let Matt make his presentation, and then we can ask him any questions and have a discussion with him, and then we'll go on to the next presenter. And I think all of y'all in the audience have been to our workshops before. If you have any questions or comments, you're surely encouraged to speak. So, Matt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The more questions, the better, always. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. We prepared a little bit of an outline and overview, hopefully anticipating several questions that you may have with respect to the design of a compensation plan, what that means for individual employees, how that ties into your budget. So we prepared a little bit of an outline and a little bit of history. Our firm has had a chance to partner with this organization back in its days as a municipal utility district. Our firm has actually been around for about 30 years. And this is all we do. We specialize in classification and compensation studies for state and local governments. We've had the great good fortune to work with better than 50 public employers in the state of Texas, with just over 350 municipal governments throughout the United States. We've done work for your particular city every year, actually every other year, dating back to 2002 as a district. Many of the occupations existed then, but that one graphic kind of jumped out at me too in terms of turnover, chipping away at and reducing that turnover percentage level, bringing the city's occupations closer to prevailing rates. So we'll talk about all of that and what goes into that. This has been a remarkable year. I've had more than one person ask when I'm going to buy property in Texas. For us, we've been very, very busy. We've got 8 or 10 active projects just in the Dallas Metroplex. We've just wrapped up studies for Georgetown, Kerrville, doing quite a bit of work in the Houston area as well as down on the coast. So all of that, hopefully, I would like to think each and every one of my future clients benefits from what we learn everywhere that we go. So we do probably 50 or 60 studies like this every year. This is an off year for your city. The last survey that we did and pay plan update that we did for Horseshoe Bay was 2012. But we'll cover a little bit more about what that looks like. The history of your specific pay plan, again, kind of dating back to that municipal utility district. It was determined then for multiple reasons. One, objectivity, defensibility, sustainability, to utilize a third party such as our firm every other year to conduct a salary survey. What's fascinating about the work that we do, it's a paper exercise. 90% of what we do, we could do without a single employee there to mess it up, I guess I'll say. We could literally recommend pay ranges for jobs. It is the jobs that are being studied when you do a pay plan and when you do a salary survey. The interesting and more critical part is the other 10%, and that is what does it mean for the individuals that hold these occupations. So we do salary surveys to determine the relative value of each and every occupation based on education, based on experience, based on responsibility, based on the consequence of action being performed. Public safety occupations, obviously they're literally people out in the field making life and death decisions every day. There are occupations that require a high level of certification, a high degree of training. There are occupations that sit in this building and work with developers and are held to a very, very high compliance-related standard as it relates to development, construction, water and wastewater regulations. There's lots and lots that go into the jobs that exist at a municipal level, and that is sometimes a very steep learning curve for individuals not familiar with local governments. There are the visible occupations, and then there are those that are behind the scenes supporting those that do. And those of you obviously that have been on council, whether you're new to council or have been on the council for a while, you start to learn more and more and more about what it takes to deliver municipal services, what it takes to meet expected, whether it's regulations, guidelines, codes, statutes, and just what it takes, obviously, on a daily basis to deliver your services to your residents, to your visitors, to your citizens. The district at the time, and now the city, recognizes that some of the occupations certainly that exist at the city also exist in the private sector, but not all of them. Julie alluded to some of them that only exist in other cities and other public employers, a lot of public safety occupations, some of your planning, some of your recreation types of positions exist only in the public sector. So you've got to go somewhere to determine what those jobs are worth, what those jobs should be valued and placed at in relation to the market. But certainly the district and the city, it recognized and continues to recognize it competes with both the public sector and the private sector to recruit and to retain qualified staff. So data is collected from a relevant market to use as one leg, I guess I'll say, of a pay planning type of exercise. So there's some history to this list. Every other year, we collect data from the following cities, literally job by job by job. We identify who the city competes with for each occupation. We start to ask these individual cities, hey, do you have a job that pays your bills, or do you have a job that responds to calls for service, or do you have a job that treats wastewater, or whatever the occupation is? And we go to each of these cities and we say, hey, yeah, we have one of these. Here's what the job description looks like. Here's what the organization chart looks like. Here's what the pay plan looks like. Almost, if not all of these employers have a formal pay range similar to the city, with a minimum and a maximum. Most organizations hire at the minimum. They try to move people towards the maximum. Not everybody does it, I guess I would say, as defensively as Horseshoe Bay, in as much that not everybody is able to administer it on pay for performance. So that very first graphic that you showed, I'd love to take that with me to a lot of other places, because there are indeed other cities that are trying to struggle towards something that looks like, hey, if you're a great performer and you're not quite at market, we want to get you closer to market, but guess what? When you get to market, you got to really knock it out of the park to remain eligible for anything. Okay? So know that that theme will ripple through when we start talking about pay range midpoint, journey level, competent performers. Okay? So I'll come back to that in a minute. What's also very interesting about this slide, at the risk of sounding picky and choosy, we recognized, and the city recognized, that it does indeed lose people to the city of Austin. I would suggest that on this list, out of any of these, and I haven't asked, so it's not fair to pick on Austin, but I will. I haven't asked them lately what pay or benefits they have that they wish they didn't. But certainly their ability to sustain just what they've been paying over the past has waned a little bit, at least in recent years. Now that may be coming back. But my point there is, and you'll see in one of my examples, they're oftentimes an outlier. They pay quite a bit for some of their occupations, specifically police and specifically for fire. There's a reason, obviously, that turnover is a little bit higher for those of you that are probably, I would say, within an hour or so of that major metro area. You look at even some of Austin's neighbors, the city of Round Rock. Everybody wants to be at 95% of Round Rock because they can't pay what Round Rock can pay. But boy, if they're close, they can probably keep their people. And you'll see where this starts to smack of either a policy or a philosophy, and where you as decision makers need the type of data that we provide you, really to arm you with as much information as possible around which to make good decisions, really to make justifiable, defensible decisions about where to place your pay. Because no matter who pays what on this list, you still retain that policy right. Okay? So the idea is to have a sample size, recognize where the city competes to get people. Also in the private sector, you'll see some examples here in my charts where we've got data from both the public sector and the private sector. This common theme, I would say, the last 3 years of my travels has dominated the topic of discussion. Why do we pay a certain position, a certain amount with salary and benefits that people believe far outpaces what is going on in the private sector? You might be right, but I would say that you're right for about the bottom 10 to 15% of your entry-level occupations. I would argue it is always a better deal, perhaps, to be an admin support position or a maintenance worker in the public sector, because you might be making $10, $11, $12 an hour, but if your employer is paying some medical benefits and a pension contribution, all of a sudden your benefits look like, what, 60% of your total compensation. That's pretty significant. That flattens out drastically by the time we get to a position that has a degree, by the time you get to a position that has managerial responsibilities, that oversees perhaps a capital and an operating budget in the millions. What I'm saying there is it's a better deal to be in the private sector by the time we get to a position that requires a degree, that might be bonus eligible. You know, even that pension contribution gets wiped out when I could get profit sharing or stock options or that kind of thing, whether it's a chief financial officer or it's a chief engineering position, that kind of thing. So that continuum kind of flattens out. And I'll come back to that topic as well. So while the cities are listed in big, bold print here, there's a couple of very important fine print here. Data is included from the private sector as often as possible. And data is adjusted, particularly from larger cities, where we believe the scope, the span of control, the budget, the size of staff may be excessively complex compared to the city of Horseshoe Bay. So you have City Manager Austin, City Manager Horseshoe Bay. We don't believe that that's a comparable comparison. Okay? So know that there is a great deal of caution exercised in the application and interpretation of the data that is collected. A couple of illustrations, might be a little bit hard to see, but the type of data that is collected, you can see even for a position that I would argue is fairly comparable from city to city to city. Certainly the type of officer that you might expect to recruit, maybe somebody that can get out of their vehicle and interact with residents and interact with business owners. That might be a little bit different dynamic depending on the beat that you're assigned to in a city as large as the city of Austin. But you can see even there how large of an array the salaries are. Now the data that's collected here and what's represented in a worksheet such as this is a comparison of midpoint to midpoint. As I mentioned, your pay range structures have a minimum and a maximum, as do all of the other cities. If you take the minimum and the maximum and divide by 2, you get to a midpoint. We like midpoint for a couple of reasons. One, from city to city, the entry value and the maximum value and its distance to midpoint varies greatly. Some organizations have a very, very narrow pay range where they don't pay a whole lot different from the entry to the start to the top. Others, very, very wide. In fact, too wide sometimes. And so the only consistent point is midpoint. Now, I'll lay that over top of that very first graphic that Julie shared, and that is that merit increase guide. You saw that 80 to 90% of midpoint, 90 to 100% of midpoint. I'll use 100% of the pay range and midpoint as interchangeable terms for a minute. I want your journey level competent performers to be at midpoint. I want those individuals that are adequately or better performing all of the expected job duties at the level that you expect them to perform them to be paid close to market. And so we use the midpoint number for planning purposes. We attempt to use this type of number to try and build, okay, the minimum might be 80% of that number, the maximum might be 120% of that number, but in midpoint budgeting, we want to try and make sure we are competitive for those individuals that could be a turnkey hire for somebody else. We don't want you to lose those individuals that you have spent some training dollars on, some development dollars on, and you have identified as competent or better performers within your organization. So the midpoint becomes a planning number. 2 anecdotes spring to mind. Number one, the last time I looked at your employee census data, the average time in position of all your employees was 7.5 years. The average comp ratio was 99.8%. Perfect. That means that your journey level 7-year people are being paid close to market. Okay? Your people that are a little bit newer are in that 80 to 90% quartile, that first quartile. Those individuals that have been here a very long time or came with the building and or our star performers, okay, we've been very, very conservative with respect to how they can earn merit once they hit midpoint. Right? You saw on that graphic, man, you got to be knocking it out of the park. And even if you are, we're only going to pay you 1% or 2% at a time per year, and you've got to earn it again. Okay? So those merit adjustments slow down quite a bit once you reach these market values. One other illustration that has both public and private sector data. An example, your customer service clerk. These are occupations with some portability, certainly some accounting skills, some customer service skills, some computer skills, but you can see both the public sector up above. You can see the private sector. ERI is short for Economic Research Institute. That is a survey database that we subscribe to, really that the city could also subscribe to. It provides a great deal of insight into what private employers in your area, very specific to your area, or I'd say maybe within an hour of where we're standing, pay a similar position. And so using that midpoint concept, here's an example, your current midpoint. Here's the market midpoint. If we average these two, just cut them in two. This variance is probably still livable. What this worksheet is telling us is that our current midpoint is within 5%. It's only 3% behind market. So in any given year, that may not trigger too much action with respect to an adjustment of the pay range. Okay, but remember when I talked about a paper exercise, if this variance was minus 8%, I would probably look to reassign this job to a different pay range. I would look to move that job up one range or two ranges to put it back into that within 5%. All too often, if you wait too long to do a salary survey, jobs move at such different rates in the marketplace. Public safety has remained fairly stable. Engineering, because of either growth, construction, development, has done pretty well. GIS is kind of coming into its own. There was a big ramp up before the Y2K stuff for IT, and that kind of went crazy for a while, IT pay. And so it ebbs and flows. Usually if you wait too long to do a salary survey, you find that you're off the mark for some jobs, you're still right there for others, simply because some jobs don't move very swiftly in the market, while as others move 3, 4, 5% at a time. And so we do salary survey work literally job by job to identify what's going on for different occupations, different career ladders, different job families. When we do salary surveys, we try to answer two basic questions. One, where are we? Specifically, hey, do we have some jobs that are close to market? Do we have some jobs that have slipped? We don't want to adopt a policy that places some jobs at 85% of market and other jobs at 100% of market. We want to try and get all positions to have a similar relationship to market. So the where are we question is really a due diligence question, I would say, and that is let's make sure we're not underdoing it for our employee. Let's make sure we're not overdoing it for our taxpayer. And the second question typically that you can answer with a salary survey is where do we want to be? Do we want to be within 5% of market? Do we want to be within 10% of market? The other slide that Julie showed with that 5-year history, the city wasn't always competitive. You saw that higher turnover. You also saw a corresponding, a little bit of an elevation in the average merit increase per year with the intent, again, we're putting up goalposts. Don't pay less than, don't pay more than, but let's get people moving through the pay range. And that's settled down that turnover, down from 20% back down into that 9, 8, 7, kind of back up to that 9% range. So you can see kind of the cause and effect of being able to adjust salaries based on market as well as based on achieved merit or earned merit. The survey data, it simply serves as a guide. And I'll say again, it expresses the value of a job, not the value of a person. Okay? So think salary survey for value of job on paper. Think merit review and performance review with eligibility for a pay adjustment as the expression of the value of the person. So pay them somewhere between here. Pay your star performers, get them moving so that they hit at least the middle of the pay range in that kind of 5 to 7 year type of range. Salary surveys rarely, if ever, dictate what your budget is. Okay? It's simply that planning process. The budget can certainly be fluctuated. Even that merit increase guide can be adjusted. Whether you move into lean years and you've got to be a little bit more conservative, so that top out for that star performer in the bottom quartile, maybe that's not 6%, maybe that's 3% or 4%. So that merit increase guide can always be adjusted based on the budget. Historically, we've attempted to reestablish every other year the city's overall position in relation to market. I would characterize that as being at market or within 5% of market. Again, that's simply a paper exercise. We survey 20 jobs or 25 different jobs. We assign each occupation to its appropriate and competitive pay range. And then we start to look at what that means for the people. Some job titles move every year, every other year. Some do not. It's basically supply and demand. So if the market is moving for individual jobs, we attempt to reestablish that overall position to ensure that nothing's moved, and if it has, we move our goalposts accordingly. Salary surveys don't mean everybody gets an increase. Okay, that's what your merit budget is for. That's what your across the board or COLA or anything like that is for. So we're not attempting to give an across the board adjustment and using the salary survey as justification for that. Okay? Employees remain eligible, obviously, for those in-range pay adjustments somewhere between those goalposts that we put up and according to that merit increase guide. So annually, your evaluators, your supervisors, your managers look at employee performance. They hold employees to certain expectations and determine whether or not they have met, achieved, exceeded those expectations that have been put in place. So what is the right compensation plan? I've got a graphic after this slide that I've accidentally shut down entire meetings with, because you get into the conversation about conservative or aggressive we need to be, what factors most influence our ability to recruit and to retain. And that was my point when I show you the list of cities. Those cities don't set your policy, you guys do. The council does. So council, their designees, as part of the budget process, seeks to establish what that needs to look like in order to keep, obviously, that turnover at a manageable level, so that you can assure that you're still able to provide the services that you need to on a daily basis. Obviously, we want the overall pay philosophy to match up with your, not only your desire, but your ability to compete at a certain level, to be able to afford to pay high performers. You'll see, and I'll just go to this next graphic, the different factors that influence not only your ability to recruit and retain, but your intent. What is your intent to pay? Can we be conservative and still get the people that we need? Do we need to be a little bit more aggressive because, and then fill in the blank? What are those factors that most dictate our abilities or our desire to position our pay plan at a certain place in relation to the market? Do we suffer a lot of turnover? Do we staff really lean? Do we expect a lot out of our people? I think some of those answers are yes. We do expect a lot out of our people. There are not lots of extra people sitting around, milling around that aren't carrying their own weight. Because they've either been managed up or managed out, I'm guessing, through your performance process, through your performance management program. Geography is always an interesting discussion. Can we get people? Can we keep them? Can they afford to live within commuting distance of where we need them to be in order to perform that job? Do they have to uproot their family in order to take a position with the city? How far are they willing to drive? What types of, whether it's work-life balance or what type of lifestyle can we afford them? What can they afford, whether it's housing or access to good schools, or what are their family needs as well? So what does that geography do to our ability to recruit and to retain? Competition is always an interesting one too, and it's different everywhere that we go. We do a lot of work in the Austin Metro and Dallas Metro. There's 50 cities in the Dallas Metro, just over 20,000 in population. We struggle with where to stop, as far as survey sampling goes, because arguably, I can go 20 miles that direction, or 20 miles that direction, or 20 miles that direction, and drive through another 10 cities. So that's always kind of an interesting, I guess I'll say, flow chart that should always be revisited when you adopt your budget every year, or when you adopt a new pay plan every other year. This type of decision analysis, have any of these factors changed? Has our market definition changed? Has our ability or intent to pay changed? So think process for a minute. Everything that we do compensation planning wise, we want it to be a regular process so we can answer our two big questions that I mentioned. But we also need it to have the flexibility that you can adapt and that you can adopt a plan that continues to meet whatever the city's needs are. Salary surveys are a little bit different from what I'll call salary administration. Now we're getting into the people part. Okay? How people move somewhere between those goalposts that we put up. Whether that's with a range width such as yours, which is there's about 15 or 20% on either side of market value, on either side of midpoint, how they move through. really varies. In all honesty, lots and lots of cities would love to be able to administer all of their salaries based on pay for performance. Certainly not very many of them are there. It's a tricky one. It's a cultural type of discussion. So a lot of places administer pay based on longevity or time of job or just a grade and step, and they move along and they give employees a step every year that they can afford to. Some use COLAs or across the board adjustments, that kind of thing. And it certainly may vary. We see that a lot as well in civil service settings or in grade and step for public safety and open range merit plans for non-safety, that kind of thing. And I've even seen it certainly fluctuate from year to year. Hey, we budgeted for a market adjustment this year, we're going to try and budget for merit adjustments next year. I would challenge some organizations, what they call a COLA or a CPI is really an across-the-board adjustment. CPI is maybe 1 to 1.1%. It's certainly higher in some places, but CPI is not big. Most places budget 2 to 3%. Everything for 2013, 2014. You've got some big commercial survey houses that have published their estimated salary budgets for 13, 14 to be in that 2.5 to 3% range. We do a lot of work in North Dakota. That's 6 to 10% because of oil boom. We're surviving some work out in Midland and Odessa. Same thing. Same answer. Cost of living is skyrocketing. Cost of housing is skyrocketing. Demand for labor, demand for jobs. But if you look at an aggregate, it's about 2.5 to 3.5% for 13, 14. And that is a composite number. That is a good private sector number as well, according to Hay, according to Aon, according to World at Work, which is kind of our association on the compensation side. I would say that merit-based pay is definitely a growing trend for obvious reasons. We classify a lot of survivors. We go a lot of places where vacancies haven't been refilled, where people are wearing a lot of hats. It's kind of wreaked havoc on job design a little bit, where we've added more to people's job descriptions. We expect a little bit more. There's more scrutiny, whether that's at the federal level, the state level, the local level. So it is a fairly justifiable and defensible way to go. So I would say kudos to this organization that you've been able to administer pay based on performance and a pretty legitimate performance evaluation program for several years running. And so, I think, again, that paper exercise, setting up the goalposts, that's not an automatic gimme for everybody. They've got to earn it. They've got to earn it within those goalposts that we've set up. The CPI, generally it's a measure of the average change over time in prices for goods and services. And so CPI doesn't usually tie too closely into wage growth. Those are usually two different numbers. It doesn't give us the value of individual jobs. I will, trumpet local government anywhere I have an opportunity and an audience. That the positions that exist in local government are jobs that require a great deal of certification, education, experience, are held to certain either federal compliance standards, environmental standards, public safety. These are individuals that are going to come into your house when you dial 911. These are, folks that are going to be building your roads, your bridges. These are folks that are going to be enforcing building codes. So it's a fascinating study for us because every job differs based on the consequence of action, based on the decisions that you expect them to make. If you just looked at CPI, that to me suggests that the value of your custodian and the value of your city manager should be the same. We've still got to do salary surveys to figure out what goalposts are appropriate, literally job by job by job. And then the rest is up to you. That's part of that budget process, whether it's a merit budget or a COLA budget or a market budget. We don't want to suggest that every position at the city gets paid the same thing. The market dictates what the value of the position is. Every employee, top to bottom, is eligible for that same merit review. That same scale, hey, I can get 0, I could get even up to 5 or 6% if I'm exceeding expectations. In summary, certainly if you couldn't tell already, again, I would say kudos. The city expects a certain level of performance out of every individual. Their performance is measured every year. Their pay is administered within a market-sensitive pay plan. Again, the majority of your workforce is right around, in fact, they're within 5 or 10% of midpoint on either side, which is outstanding. That gives us market values, that gives us midpoint budgeting, easy to work with. We're not perpetually slamming people at and over the top of the pay range. And that's outstanding to me. The last 5 years, if we've averaged that out at 3.5, 3.8 for salary adjustments, that doesn't have a strong correlation to what other cities are doing. And so you're not perpetuating anything from city to city to say if you go up, we go up. You get that a little bit with some of Round Rock's neighbors, because I know they always want to be 95% of the big one or 95% of that one. And we travel a lot. We go to a lot of council of government meetings where you have mayors and council members in one room from 8, 10 different cities, and they always ask each other, why do we want to elbow each other out of the way to be the top 1, 2, or 3 payers for police or for fire? Jokingly, I usually tell them you're asking the wrong guy because my livelihood depends on you wanting to be able to, kind of elbow, the neighbor out of the way. But that is not this. You've got to go somewhere to get the data to use for planning purposes. We set those goalposts. We administer pay based on performance, and that's how we arrive on that pay planning discussion. So we use good data. We use your budget, and we don't, get too tied into what these other cities are doing, for that specific budget discussion. That, I think, as fast as I can talk, gets us started. Questions, Mr. Mayor, members of council?
I'd like to make a couple of comments first. When I first became mayor, I said this a lot, and there's another good example today. We all owe Lake LBJ Mudd a great vote of thanks, both for our financial situation and also for a lot of things they put in place. It's great to have a compensation system that's based on merit, and it's also very good that we've accomplished getting such a high percentage of our employees close to the midpoint. Y'all got a slide of that when we had our first budget meeting, and we're really about where we want to be. One thing else I'd like to mention is I guess it was Stan used the word transparent a little while ago. Our salary administration is totally transparent to our employees. They know the salary range for their position. They obviously know what their compensation is. They know what their evaluation is because they sign it. And at the end, they know whether their evaluation is a 1, 2, or 3 in total. They see that chart that Julie put up, and so they know how their raise of 4, 5, 6%, 0 was computed. And I think that's exceptionally healthy, personally. Anyway, enough said. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Tom?
Matt, I appreciate the review. As a former corporate manager, it's been at least 10 years since I've gone through any of this, so this brings back a lot of memories and some nightmares, but I do really appreciate it. I think the area that I'm most interested at this point is probably to talk about the attrition numbers, because if we're doing a good job in administering our salary plan for those midpoint or longer serving employees, being somewhat isolated, using one of your terms, the geographic area. Maybe our costs are higher here as far as our ability of employees to live here. We don't offer a lot of schools. If somebody wanted to place a small family or a young family here, how do we deal with those sort of issues? I guess that's probably where I'm most interested in as we go forward with our salary planning. So, but thanks for all of what you've reviewed with us.
Yeah, Steve.
Matt, I thank you for being here too. And we have a responsibility to develop trust, not only within our community, but with our staff and employees. And I think what we are sharing this morning will certainly lend strength to that trust. One of the concerns that has been raised, and you have been made aware, is a term called closed loop. Closed loop, as I understand it, has to do with what Julie mentioned. 41% of our evaluations are based on not closed loop, and all the balance with police and fire and some other positions are, quote, closed loop. And would you speak to that? And is that a legitimate concern, or is that something that we should at least understand?
Yeah, You know, to be honest, I had never heard that term before. Julie called a month ago. You've got to go somewhere to get the data. You've got to look for other employers, large and small, that employ similar jobs. All too often, when salary surveys are done, the data is just aggregated together, and it doesn't tell us much about an individual occupation. So yeah, I have a great deal of sensitivity, I think, to that, in as much that your city has not stated we want to be 95% of somebody, that kind of thing. That being said, the only way to do what I believe to be a fair market comparison is doing a whole job comparison. And so if I look at the job description for a police officer, I've got to find out, and find other employers that have a similar job. Those, in fact, are the employers that take our people, and or at least our employees could entertain taking another position and performing the same job duties. And so we need an awareness of the value of that occupation from employer to employer. You can adjust the sample. You can adjust the cities that you compare to. At the end of the day, you're still competing with other public employers for police officers, for firefighters, for planners. You've got to recognize where that competition is somewhere and somehow. But it's just for planning purposes, okay? Just to set those goalposts. How you go about paying is that performance discussion instead. And so, there's a great deal. Yeah, to me, there's sensitivity there, but it wasn't a term, that I was familiar with. Even other than and I didn't mean to be flippant about it, but literally that attitude of, well, we want to be the top 1, 2, 3. Certainly where I come from too, in the Phoenix metropolitan area, there's 20 cities. In Paradise Valley, always wants to pay more than Scottsdale, always wants to pay more than Tempe, always wants, that kind of thing. And so that's not been this organization's history. This organization's history is, let's establish a fair, sustainable wage for each position and expect performance for each individual person.
Anything else, or anybody in the audience?
One thing. I just wanted to remind council that there is a policy within the city that benefits cannot exceed 40% of an employee's pay. And when he was talking about the lower compensation ranges, could be up to 60 at the city. There is a threshold for that in policy.
Matt, thank you for coming, and again, thank you for the great service over, I guess, 11 years, and we look forward to another good product from you next spring.
None of us have changed a bit in 11 years.
Right.
Thank you all very much.
As we talked about at our first budget workshop, the council's involvement is different every other year. Then next spring, you'll get a complete study, a chance to really evaluate all the salary ranges and all that goes with that. And you approved the number at the budget workshop of about $100,000. I think it was $100,000. Julie has run the matrix that you saw up there against last year's merit rating, and the number of dollars of increase came in slightly below 100. So the number that y'all are comfortable with, which is about 2.6%, I think, of our total compensation, fits with the matrix that we used last year. And I think all of our collective judgment is a very fair matrix. I think Matt confirmed it. It skews the money to the people that are performing well and are below midpoint. So I think we're in good shape, and for a lot of reasons, a lot of history. Anything else? Matt, again, thank you very much. Thank you. That gets us back over.